With the issue of separation for Ab and Britt, initially as babies, we were told kind of inseparable. We went with that.
For 34 years, the world watched Abby and Brittany Hensel navigate life in a way that most people could never fully comprehend. Two minds, two personalities, two sets of dreams, all contained within one remarkable body. They went to school together, learned to drive together, built careers together, and faced every single morning with a level of cooperation that most siblings could never achieve even living apart. Their story captured hearts across the globe, not because they were unusual, but because they were so profoundly human. They laughed, they argued, they had preferences, they had ambitions, and they lived with quiet dignity that silenced anyone who dared to reduce them to a medical curiosity. Then came the surgery. Then came the separation. And then came something the world was entirely unprepared for. Two women, living independently for the very first time, stepping into a new chapter that neither of them had ever truly imagined. What does it feel like to wake up alone in your own body after 34 years of constant companionship? What happens to an identity built on togetherness when togetherness is suddenly gone? And how do two sisters who spent every moment of their lives physically connected begin to define who they are as separate human beings? These are not simple questions. They are questions that Abby and Brittany have been living through one difficult and beautiful day at a time. The surgery itself was described by the medical team involved as one of the most complex separation procedures ever attempted in modern medicine. For decades, doctors had agreed almost universally that separating Abby and Brittany was not a realistic option. Their shared organs, their merged spinal nerves, their single pelvis, all of it made the idea seem not just dangerous, but nearly impossible. The liver alone presented enormous challenges. Dividing a shared liver between two bodies requires precision that pushes the absolute limits of surgical capability. Add to that the shared bladder, the shared reproductive system, the deeply intertwined nerve pathways running from two separate spinal columns into one lower body, and you begin to understand why the medical community had classified separation as too risky for so many years. What changed was a combination of time, technology, and extraordinary medical courage. Advances in robotic surgery allowed for movements more precise than human hands could manage alone. Artificial intelligence mapping tools gave surgeons the ability to trace nerve pathways in detail before a single incision was made. And a team of specialists assembled from across multiple disciplines: neurosurgery, vascular reconstruction, orthopedic medicine, organ transplant science, came together with a plan that had been reviewed and rehearsed for months before the operating room doors ever opened. The operation lasted through the night and well into the following day. At one point during the procedure, a cardiac event threatened to end everything. Abby's heart stopped. The room shifted into emergency response. Cardiac specialists moved immediately while the rest of the team held position and kept Brittany stable. The moment passed. The heart was restarted. The surgery continued. When it was over, two separate patients lay on two separate tables. For the first time in their lives, there was physical space between them. The weeks that followed the surgery were described by those close to them as some of the hardest of their lives. Harder, in many ways, than anyone had anticipated. The body is one thing. The mind is another entirely. Physically, the recovery demanded everything they had. Muscles that had spent 3 decades working in perfect coordination with another person now had to learn how to function independently. Nerves that had always shared signals now had to recalibrate to a new reality. Simple actions, sitting upright, turning the head, lifting an arm, required conscious effort and caused real pain. Physical therapists worked with them daily, patiently guiding them through exercises that felt humiliating in their simplicity, but were absolutely essential to their recovery. The emotional experience, however, was something that no amount of physical therapy could fully address. Both Abby and Brittany have spoken in private sessions with counselors about the profound and disorienting grief that followed separation. This is not a grief that the outside world immediately understands, because from the outside, separation looks like freedom. It looks like a gift. But for two people who had never spent a single moment of their lives without the physical presence of the other, the sudden absence of that presence felt like losing a part of themselves that had always been there. Brittany reportedly described the sensation as feeling like a phantom limb, the awareness of something that is no longer there, but that the brain still reaches for. Abby experienced her own version of this, waking in the night and instinctively adjusting as though another body were still beside her. Mirrors were placed in both of their rooms during the early weeks of recovery, not for vanity, but because therapists found that seeing their own reflection helped each woman affirm her own presence in reality. It was a small tool, but it helped. 6 weeks after the surgery, they were brought together in person for the first time as separate individuals. The meeting was private. No cameras were present. According to those who were there, the moment was completely quiet. They reached out and held hands. Both of them cried. And in that silence, something important happened. They began the long process of understanding what their relationship would look like now that it was no longer defined by physical necessity, but by genuine, chosen love. The question of identity has always been complicated for Abby and Brittany. Even before the surgery, they were two distinct people who happened to share a body, and the world frequently struggled to hold both of those truths at the same time. People would address them as a single unit, make assumptions about their thoughts and preferences based on what one of them said, or reduce them to a novelty rather than recognizing them as individuals with separate interior lives. After the surgery, the identity question became both simpler and more complex at the same time. Simpler, because now the physical separation made it easier for others to see them as two people. More complex, because decades of shared experience had woven their identities together in ways that could not simply be unwound by a surgical procedure. Abby had always been the more assertive of the two in public settings, more likely to speak first and more comfortable in social situations that required outward confidence. Brittany had always been more introspective, more measured in her responses, more interested in the deeper mechanics of the world around her, science, medicine, the way systems work. These differences had always existed, but in a shared body, those differences had to be negotiated constantly. Every decision had to be a compromise. Every preference had to be weighed against the other person's needs. Now, for the first time, each of them could simply make a choice and live with the consequences of that choice alone. This sounds straightforward. In practice, it required an entirely new psychological framework. Both of them have worked extensively with therapists since the surgery, not because they're struggling in a clinical sense, but because the process of building a fully independent identity after a lifetime of shared living is genuinely unprecedented. There is no guidebook for this. There is no one who has been through it before who can sit across from them and say, "I understand exactly what you are feeling." What they have done, remarkably, is become that guidebook for each other. Abby's life after surgery has settled into something that looks, from the outside, somewhat like the life she was already building before the operation. She has continued her career in education, returning to the classroom in a role that colleagues and parents describe as warm, patient, and genuinely dedicated. Teaching had always suited her. She has a natural ability to meet people where they are, to recognize what someone needs in order to understand something, and then find the path that leads them there. The children in her classroom do not see a woman with an extraordinary medical history. They see a teacher who shows up every morning ready to do her job well. Her marriage to Josh Bowling, which she entered while still sharing a body with Brittany, has continued and deepened in the new landscape of separated life. The marriage itself was already complex before the surgery. The legal and emotional dimensions of the union that necessarily involved two people in one body had raised questions that no one had a clean answer for. After the surgery, those complexities shifted. Abby and Josh have had to redefine what their partnership looks like, and by all accounts, they have done so with honesty and commitment. Brittany's relationship with Josh has also evolved. What was once a constant, unavoidable physical presence has become something more like a family relationship, distinct, boundaried, and built on mutual respect. For Abby, one of the most meaningful developments in her post-surgery life has been the experience of physical solitude. She has spoken about learning to simply sit alone in a room, something that sounds entirely ordinary, but that she had genuinely never experienced before. The first time she sat by herself in her home without another person in physical contact with her, she described feeling a wave of emotions that she struggled to name all at once. Relief was part of it. Loneliness was part of it. Wonder was part of it. And underneath all of it, something she eventually identified as curiosity about who she was going to become in this new form of life. Brittany's post-surgery journey has followed a different path, one marked by exploration and an expanding sense of personal possibility. In the years leading up to the surgery, she had already begun to stake out territory that felt distinctly her own. Her interest in science and medicine, her involvement with organizations supporting families of conjoined twins, her developing friendship with Ryan, a man she had met through shared intellectual interests who had always treated her as an individual rather than as half of a pair. After the surgery, these threads of her own life became something she could pursue without the constant negotiation that shared living required. She has deepened her work with advocacy organizations, speaking at medical conferences and educational events with an authority that comes from lived experience no textbook can replicate. She speaks about what it means to live in a body that medicine struggles to categorize, about the importance of treating people with rare conditions as full human beings rather than case studies, and about the ways in which the medical system both helped and limited her throughout her life. Her relationship with Ryan has grown steadily and quietly. Those close to Brittany describe Ryan as someone who possesses a rare quality, the ability to be fully present with someone without trying to define or explain them. He does not treat Brittany's history as the most interesting thing about her, which is exactly why she trusts him. Their relationship is still relatively private, but it has given Brittany something she described in a counseling session as the experience of being chosen. Being seen as a person someone wanted to build a life with, separate from everything that had always defined her in the world's eyes. She has also spoken openly about the physical freedom of her new life in terms that are specific and grounded. The ability to choose her own clothing entirely, not negotiating colors and styles with another person who occupied the same body, continues to carry emotional weight for her that surprises even herself. The darker colors she gravitates toward now feel like a form of self-expression she never fully had access to before. Small things. But small things are often where identity actually lives. Together, Abby and Brittany have channeled their extraordinary and unique experience into something that extends beyond their own lives. The foundation they began developing in the period surrounding the surgery has taken real shape in the months since. It focuses on 3 areas: medical research funding for rare conjoined conditions, educational resources for families navigating a diagnosis, and direct financial support for families facing the kinds of medical decisions that come with raising conjoined twins. They are well positioned to lead this work because they understand, from the inside, every dimension of it. They know what it feels like to be examined by doctors who see a condition before they see a person. They know what families need to hear and what they do not need to hear when they are sitting in a hospital room trying to make impossible decisions. And they know what it means to grow up in a world that is not designed for you, to have to adapt constantly and creatively just to participate in ordinary life. The foundation is already connected with several major medical institutions and is in conversation with researchers who study rare developmental conditions. Abby and Brittany's willingness to allow limited documentation of their medical history, on their own terms, with full control over what is shared, has provided researchers with information that simply did not exist before in the literature. Their contribution to medical science is not incidental to their story. It is one of the most significant chapters in it. There is a question that follows Abby and Brittany everywhere now, asked in different ways by different people, but always pointing at the same thing. Are you happy? Was it worth it? It is not a fair question, in the sense that it implies it was a clean before and after, a clear upgrade from one state of being to another. Life does not work that way, and their lives especially have never followed a simple line from problem to solution. What they have now is not a fixed destination. It is a new beginning, full of its own challenges and its own rewards, its own losses and its own discoveries. What both of them have said, in their own ways and in different contexts, is that they do not regret the surgery. They also do not claim that everything after the surgery has been easy or that separation solved the questions that their lives raised. What they have found is something harder to name, but more important: the experience of being fully, separately, entirely themselves for the first time, not half of a pair, not a shared entity. 2 women, 2 lives, 2 futures opening up in front of them with a breadth that neither of them knew was possible. Abby returns to her classroom every morning with purpose. Brittany speaks to rooms full of medical professionals and families with a voice that carries the weight of everything she has lived. They talk on the phone now, every single day, by choice. They visit each other regularly, and those visits carry a tenderness that is different from anything they experienced before, because now, when they're together, it is a decision they have made. It is not proximity. It is presence. For 34 years, the world defined them by what they shared. Now, finally, they are discovering who they are when they stand apart. And what they are discovering is that the love between them, the deep, complicated, unbreakable bond that carried them through every difficult day of a genuinely extraordinary life, did not live in their shared body. It was never anatomical. It was always something else entirely. Something that no surgery could ever touch, and nothing in the world could separate.